Okay, we'll call the September 16th, 2025 meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission to order. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So tonight we'll have some time for public comment, approve our minutes of September 2nd. The majority of our time will be spent on our second meeting dedicated to the project that we're calling Enabling Housing, kind of continuing zoning update work, this time focusing on zoning districts that are outside of the village centers, which we spent the last year working on. So now we're moving on to something different. And Chris has given us all homework for that, and we have a structured discussion that he will facilitate. Then we will hear reports from all of us, including from Chris, town planner. Any other business, and then wrap up. Would anybody like to make any changes to the agenda? Good to go? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment. Do we have any public comment, especially for items not on tonight's agenda?
Jim Carroll from Boulder Hill Road. I'd like to invite all the people that have an interest in housing that would like to see the 2022 with the spring 2025 amendments for the Jericho Land Use Development Regulations in an attempt to implement in Jericho. It's the first one. We will be threatened, DRB. We're reasonably sure because we've been told, watch out. But we're trying to build a duplex. And it's all the papers have been submitted. They're not all on board. We do not have the notes. But one of the apprehensions is confusion about a case law called the Stowe Club Highlands / Hildebrandt, which does not apply to our project because the Jericho Land Use Development Regulations were amended in 2022 with the 5.6 changes in the spring of 2025 in the case law, which includes many cases now, essentially says that when there's change, finality has to give way to flexibility. So my history in the 47 years that I've been in Jericho, I end up going past the DRB and into court, and that's where we get people to read and give us justice. So if you have an interest in advocating for housing on the 24th, your work will be put to the test as to whether or not. Now, in the long run, we have a project which, in keeping with the character of the area, we have yellow school buses, we have high density parking, high volume, and lots of kids' voices in the largest building in the area is immediately adjacent. And to that western view, we have 13,000 acres dedicated to the military industrial complex on the other side. So we think if you can't build there, where in Jericho can you build? We have gas, we have municipal water, we have conventional septic systems, we have topography which lends well to sheltering, and we have what's the other thing we have? Oh, power. So all of those things are at the property. The property is all roughed in, it's all graded, there's no erosion, septic systems are all done. And all we have to do is to deal with the Jericho Development Review Board and whatever the successor is to that. The last time I was in court with this group, the judge told me, really screwed up. You didn't carry your application forward to the court, so I don't have anything to rule on. But he told the Jericho town attorney and the rest of the people that were present, Mr. Carroll, please bring this project back to the court if there's any further difficulty.
Can I ask a question just for clarification? When you started your comments, you said you were building a duplex. Did you mean duplex or did you mean quad?
I meant quad.
Okay, just for the record. So
Yes.
just want it to be on
Yes.
recording that it's not actually a duplex.
Thank you
You're welcome.
very much. We are actually building a duplex.
Right,
But we are building a quad.
Yeah.
And you are correct. So one other comment as you go forward.
Okay, just so you know, you have like one more minute.
Okay. I suggest that workforce housing, and I will be presenting on the 24th, how by providing more housing, you actually provide housing through the whole spectrum because you free properties up. But 5.6 was a very beneficial thing, but I think Jericho has missed the boat in pushing us towards multifamily instead of clustered housing. It is a giant pain to build properties that are considered public, subject to the labor and industry rules, and it's simultaneously taking the privacy away from the occupants because of the common walls and all of the interfaces. So the value of the multi-family unit is considerably below the standalone clustered unit because the whole concept of the way we look at density, in my opinion, is wrong. That the number of bedrooms, the number of people, the total square feet, those are all relevant. But the other thing is that there's a major taking going on coming out of Montpelier saying, oh, you can't build here and you can't build there, and we're going to shut Act 250 down in this part, but we're going to come in really hard on this part. You have to build where the topography, the soils, and the circumstances allow you to build. The villages were created because of water power, because of proximity. They weren't created because they're the best thing. And just watch what happened with speed bumps in Jericho Center. Who wants to have a 3 or 4-year-old child playing out? I had a truck approach
Okay.
as I was coming from Mount Mansfield today. The truck came down Stones Hill, which is Brown's Trace. It was going so fast. And this is a 100,000-pound triaxle truck. He hit the bridge and came 3 feet over the center line. And that's what the people who are trying to walk, ride bikes, dealing with. So I think the Planning Commission can say, we want to have a quiet, peaceful, walkable community and redo things.
Thank
Can I
you.
ask you one quick question?
Sure,
Where is this development? Is that the one on Morgan Road?
it is.
Thank
Yep.
you.
And you're welcome to go over and play.
Okay, do we have any other public comment online? Jim, thank you very much.
Nothing else is online.
Okay. Then we'll move on to approving our minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of September 2nd?
I will make the motion to approve the minutes.
Chris, and a second.
I'll second.
Eric, thank you. Any clarification, correction, discussion of the minutes? Okay, let's approve the minutes. All those in favor, please say yes. Yes. Anybody
Yes.
opposed? Okay, everybody said yes. Okay, so now I will turn it over to Chris, who is going to facilitate our discussion this evening about housing typologies and allowable uses.
Great, thank you. So tonight we are continuing our work on enable housing and looking at ways to encourage cluster development in areas beyond village centers and balance growth with protecting natural resources. Through this section, I'm going to review our timeline, give a little follow-up from our last meeting, and then we'll get into a discussion on housing types. So just to ground us on where our charge is coming from, these are the 9 recommendations that the Affordable Housing Committee forwarded to the Select Board, which then came to the Planning Commission. Our discussion tonight in part comes from recommendation 2, which is to remove regulatory distinctions between single-family homes and other housing types. So tonight we have a lot of information to get through, and I'm going to be talking a bit more than usual, but I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as possible. So as previously mentioned, tonight we are focusing on the discussion of housing types and allowable uses and what districts they should be in and possible concerns. So at the last Planning Commission meeting, there were a couple questions and comments I wanted to follow up on. So for setting goals for our work, there was some feedback that some of these were already in the town plan. So thank you, Wendy. I think that came from you. I pulled out some that I thought were most relevant. So there was something in the stewarding a resilient community section, which talks about directing development to village growth areas and incentives for cluster development. There was something in the create housing choices for all that emphasized providing diverse housing types for a wide demographic of residents in villages and rural areas. and the need for infrastructure to support that. And then in the growing a vibrant community section, that also talks about the need for diverse housing types. So these are high-level goals that we want to make sure that we're achieving, but what we're doing now is we're drilling down to like another level. I'll note that throughout the plan, there's a strong emphasis on focusing development in the village and growth areas. If there are other important goals in the town plan that you think we should be referring to as part of this work that I missed, then just let me know and we can make sure that that's folded into. There were also comments that we have a lot of information on natural resources already mapped and that we should be relying on those to identify what needs to be protected. Wendy, I think that also came from you. And there are lots of maps identifying a lot of resources. Some of these are already protected in the natural resources overlay. And we know that specifically we want to look at the recent mapping of forest blocks to make sure they're protected, but there are other maps there that we can refer to as issues come up. There was a recognition, also a recognition that one of the articles that we read last week used a slightly different definition of missing middle than how we are using it. So I've included here the definition of missing middle as it's defined in Vermont's Homes for All toolkit. The emphasis there is on size and scale of housing, so more like ADUs, duplexes, multi-unit. Across the bottom here are different housing types included in Vermont's Home Again toolkit, which is a guide to building missing middle housing specifically in Vermont. I also wanted to call attention to the missing middle definition in Jericho's town plan. That definition emphasizes affordability, housing that is affordable to people that making certain incomes. This is the definition of affordability that was referred to in the select board's housing target resolution. The next two slides are a follow-up on comments related to Jericho's zoning districts and their intent, and that was part of the pre-reading assignment for tonight, is reading through those. But taking a step back from zoning, I wanted to go over the future land use map, which is related to state policies and that our zoning should be consistent with. Village centers, village and transition areas are where our town plan emphasizes development and growth areas where we should be ideally concentrating more growth, having smaller lots and greater diversity of housing types. The three rural areas that are shown here are mostly aligned with our larger lot zones that are 3 to 10 acres. We also, the working group that worked on the future land use map, I think will come up. Some of the discussion will come up again when we getting into some of the rural districts, particularly that tan versus the green areas. Yeah.
Can you just remind me the difference between the designations on this future land use map and our current zoning map? So in other words, the village area and the transition area, how do those relate to our current zoning districts?
That is a great question, and I'm going to get to it on the next slide.
Okay,
Um,
it's like a plan.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I'll note here that the rural general classification, those are the 10 areas. Those include some of our zoning districts, like a really wide range of what our zoning districts are. Heidi called me yesterday and we kind of talked through that. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to go. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go over this too. So here you can see our zoning districts, and I'm sorry that these aren't on the same slide, so it's not lined up right against each other. But I would say our zoning districts generally align with the land use map. That rural general category, though, includes areas that are zoned village, which is 1 acre, low density residential, that is 3 acre, and the rural ag residential, which is 10 acres. So
there's some inconsistencies there. Yeah.
yes,
Well, right, because I feel like we could expand the village districts. And I think, which is what I think we were talking about with the future land use map. The sort of, so I'm thinking of like along Lee River Road, for example.
so one of the things the working group did when we were working on this with CCRPC was we pushed really hard to expand the village area, which is the pink. And I feel like we pushed it as far as they were comfortable in pushing it.
Right, we were successful somewhat. but they said no to some of
And
the,
why, remind me, why,
It was access to utilities.
but why their, what I want to say is probably not the right way to say it, but why their opinion matters.
Why do they have more power than we do?
This is their land use map.
But that doesn't mean, does that mean that we cannot make a change that goes counter to this?
We shouldn't, but that tan area that's shown on their land use map is reflected in our zoning by the village, low density residential and rural ag. So I think that tells us we could make changes to our zoning map and still be consistent with their land use map. Because their land use map currently reflects something that's 3 of our zones and 1 of their land use classifications.
right, ultimately, our zoning map controls, not the future land use map in terms of a DRB application. However, their future land use map controls money, resources, grants, state legislation, at some point, their stuff could trump our stuff.
What's your underlying concern?
Well, I wouldn't say I have a concern, it's more of a question, but, I just wonder if there could be more parts of Jericho that have higher density and or smaller lot sizes.
I think the answer is yes, and I think it would be consistent with their map.
Chris, that was my question yesterday too, to try and figure it out. And the thing that made it make sense was the piece that Chris said, which is what's here in the transition and rural general encompasses 3 of our things. So we could conceivably, next meeting, decide that we wanted to change what we consider our 1 acre, 3 acre, and 10 acre. We have lots of play if we want to use it with those
Okay.
areas.
Okay,
And that's what we're gonna talk about next time, but not this time. because
Okay.
This time, we're talking about housing types.
okay,
Right.
excellent.
Yes. Because at the next meeting, we're talking about dimensional standards like lot size, that type of stuff.
Okay,
Since it's just us, can I move the screen a little?
Oh, yeah,
closer
you
to
know
the
what?
Table?
I thought about that before.
Oh, thank you. SJ, Sabina just told me you had your hand up and I'm sorry I didn't see it.
That's okay. I just wanted to add to that one of the things that what I took away from those CCRPC land use maps was that it doesn't tell us it doesn't necessarily tell us or dictate what we can do. We have to have good rationalization, but we can slowly nudge things to change the borders of their future land use map when it comes up again in 8 or 10 years. And one of the things that I was really pushing for when we kind of hit a wall with how big the pink area could be was to make the orange transition area as big as possible. Because that orange transition area, if we focus some attention there, that's an area that at the next iteration of the land use map could turn pink. And then we could find another piece of the map to call transition. And so there's ways to kind of push boundaries by what we do with our own zoning regs and our own district map.
Putting CP's land use map aside, well, let me add another layer. When they developed that, they also looked at our future land use map in the town plan. Just to make sure it wasn't consistent. Our zoning map is much more aligned with the future land use map in our town plan. So that would be something to just be aware of.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but the other thing was, and I can recognize and sympathize with their struggle. They're trying to create a system and a rubric that fits over every town. I mean, the state is, and then CCRPC is trying to fit a rubric over every town in Chittenden County, and they vary widely. And so you know, they have these kind of definitions and they have to put rules around what each category means and what can and can't go into it. And sometimes we would just butt up against those rules and they can't budge on them and they don't necessarily fit for Jericho, but it's where we're at.
Yeah, it's part of a transition which is going to statewide, which I think is probably a good thing. Is just trying to have consistent land use policies across the 200 and however many towns there are in the state. The other thing about the zoning here is that our forestry district more consistently aligns with the rural conservation land use classification that's on this map, and that so that one I think is very consistent. And this actually, I think this came up during our future land use map discussion as our working group, is that rural general category, that tan area, was really an area where we thought there was more flexibility, or where we would want to have more flexibility was closer to paved roads. We looked at soil types. There were some other factors we looked at too. I can't remember what they were, but all right. Now to recap our discussion from last meeting, I'm just going to read through this for the record, as well as just to get it up for discussion. So in terms of goals, what I was hearing was to allow as much flexibility to create housing throughout town, as much and as diverse as possible, in ways that protect natural resources already identified and mapped, is consistent with smart growth policies, and maintain the intent of existing zoning districts, to rely on maps of identified resources for conservation and soils advantageous for development, and site plans with cluster development should be tailored to meet the intent of existing zoning.
Yes, except, I'm sorry, I didn't see this sooner. That phrase throughout town, I wasn't comfortable with the last time, and I thought we kind of noodled on it as a group and came up with something like slightly more targeted, like allow as much flexibility to create housing in, I forget what we had said, in sort of appropriate locations or something to that effect. I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, you're
Now, but that throughout town is exactly the opposite of what the regional planning goals are, and what our future land use map is, and what our current zoning districts are trying to accomplish. And I think the creative challenge that we have now is to allow flexibility to create housing in more locations throughout town. Maybe that's what it was. It is something much, but like not absolutely everywhere, because then we wouldn't have a forestry district, we wouldn't have rural ag, we wouldn't have a spectrum of intensity of land uses.
You're right, and I have my notes here. I'm just looking to see.
It doesn't,
But yes,
we can get it
Yeah.
exactly right. I just wanted to make sure, since what you're doing is like setting the stage,
yeah.
make sure that we're all on the same page.
I don't remember that conversation.
Yeah, okay.
So just in case I don't have it
Right.
written down.
Was the intent of each zoning district is what you said.
Yep, I may have addressed it in the
last part of the sentence.
in the 1, 2, 3.
Right, yeah. I would say create housing in different locations in town. Or in more locations in town, not quite sure.
All right. That's good.
Thank you.
I'll come back.
Okay.
you said to expand the housing opportunities within the context of applying the principle of smart growth. Is one of the things you said.
So that he has that here.
But you're talking specifically about the throughout town.
Yeah.
I included your caveats,
Right,
but it's that throughout town. So
right.
we'll,
Triggers me still.
okay, we don't want that. Anything else on the other three for the review of the goals? And then in terms of guidance, and the reason why the recap on the guidance is important is because this is when we start to work on the red lines. This is what Chris Flynn and I are going to be using. That the focus area should be town-wide with the possibility of more opportunity in the low-density residential, and I added and village district. Regulation should encourage smaller and more dense housing, allow more diverse housing types, and then I'm asking and density, while recognizing these areas should be areas are intended to preserve farmland, open space, and natural resources.
When you say density, what density do you mean? So let's say we're in a forestry district. Someone wants to put a cluster of 10 houses in there. Close together, a little hamlet. Is that increasing the density the way in the terms you're using it there, or is it more? I have a piece of property in Griswold development that's a 1 acre lot, and I want to tear down the house and put up a fourplex.
So let's take the specific districts out of my answer, my initial answer. Maybe we come up with something where if you build houses that are between 1,000 to 1,400 square feet, you get a double density or some some type of density increase based on achieving goals that we're trying to achieve. But then that second part, recognizing these areas are intended to preserve farmland, open space, and natural resources, that density bump could be different for the different areas. It doesn't have to be a blanket thing.
So that would effectively push more for clustered development in most places where you could have land that would otherwise be, we're going to keep this preserved and undeveloped for ag, for forestry, for scenic view corridors. But now you can take that 100 acres, preserve all but 10 of it, and put on 10, something to that effect.
I am assuming in most, if not all these scenarios, it is clustered. There is very clear direction in the town plan about clustering. The direction from the select board that came from the Affordable Housing Committee talked about clustering. So I feel like that's pretty clear direction that we've gotten as a planning commission to factor in.
Which is number 3 on the first list.
I don't understand the.
It was 6.
Yeah, I just the
Oh,
bullet.
I'm sorry.
On the slide you were already on,
Sorry.
it had it in there. The third bullet on the goals. Site plans with clustered development.
I don't understand in the bottom sentence, while recognizing these areas are intended to preserve farmland. What areas are you talking about?
Oh, that's a good point. So I'm not being very, my wording there is not very great. So,
These to some.
I think we are thinking now that it's village. We're looking at village, low density residential, rural ag, and forestry zones for potential changes. And this last one is getting to the point that the rural ag and forestry are in a different category than the village and low density residential.
Okay, I think it would be clearer if it's specifically said that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I have another comment about the first bullet point. I'd still want to advocate for including the commercial district in, when we're talking about where there's more possibilities for housing. The low density residential village with a question mark, but I also think we should include commercial district there.
Did you say include?
Include,
And can I pick up on the more diverse housing types in areas? Is there a reason why we want to exclude those from areas that have more diverse housing types, including cluster developments, multifamily? If that's a way to preserve more open space, rather than having, again, take a 100-acre lot that's got subdividable into 10 acres or 5 acres. If you can preserve more of that by putting a cluster in there, isn't that something we want to encourage?
You are jumping way ahead yeah, I mean, that is exactly what we need to be talking about tonight. Yeah, and I'm just giving like some background information, recapping before we get to that, but that's exactly where we need to go.
So in essence, though, the third bullet is actually could be just the first couple of words, which is,
It could just be housing types,
right, allow more diverse housing types.
period.
I think that would make it more clear.
Okay,
I think that's what you were, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we did that, and because we also have made it very clear that part of our goals are recognizing the different zoning has different purposes and including the intention to have farmland, open space and natural resources. So I think we can cut off that extra clause because it just adds confusion.
I have a,
great.
I asked this early on in my membership of the planning commission about the process of changing zoning boundaries. And I think Susan said, well, it's really complicated. We basically don't do it. So my question is that a tool to use or is it not a tool? Because it may be possible that, I don't know, I'm not saying we should do it, but would it be an option to rethink the designation of the zoning districts and allow, let's say the village district got a little bit bigger to allow more housing there, and then the rural ag could be more stringently regulated for development? Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I think, yes.
I don't know, because right now, these tools are all working within the existing zoning boundaries.
Right,
So my question is that another tool or is it not really another tool?
I have a very town planner answer.
Kevin.
I don't know how hard it is to change the boundary, because we changed some of the boundaries as part of the BNG, like we tweaked the boundaries of the Riverside district. So I think it's just going through a zoning amendment process, but it's complicated going through a zoning amendment process. But we have gotten direction from the select board on what to look at. And it does not say to look at changing zoning district boundaries,
Yes, but
which I
To
think
be
is
fair,
a
the
other
report did make that
discussion.
recommendation.
that assumes that they have the expertise to make or not make that suggestion.
What did you say, SJ?
The report does make that recommendation. It wasn't part of the bulleted list, but it did make that recommendation. But you're right, the select board didn't move it forward. But just to be clear, that is a very strong recommendation from the Affordable Housing Committee.
So thank you. My town planner answer is we have a list of 9 things that we're looking at. And that's a big question to look at that.
It is, but I would argue that the select board doesn't have the town planning expertise that's in this room. And that if the experts said, and I'm not saying we should do it, but if they said, this might be a really good idea and proposed it, then they might reconsider that.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it.
Okay,
I'm saying I don't want to include it in what we're doing
Okay.
now.
okay.
right. My response as like a planning commission member is that we can change the zoning of the let's say, of the village or of the low density residential district to accommodate the level of intensity that we want, regardless of what it's called or what the boundary is. And my understanding is that we were able to change the boundaries when we did the BMG because we were still within the boundaries of the village center designation from the state. What we really did is we changed the names of the village centers and we changed CD3 and CD4, but we didn't change the map per se in any other way. So it was more of like a technical difference. We didn't change we changed the intensity somewhat in CD3 and CD4, but they were all ways that was still within like the form-based code. To change the map is like what I was told, and maybe this isn't correct, but to change the map is like a separate process and talk about the future land use map. The CCRPC has to approve, they do have to approve a zoning district map change. They also have to approve a zoning change, but amendments. So I just think we can get there faster, easier. I think we can accomplish our goals by looking at the details of density, lot size, which we can change. It doesn't matter what's on the map.
Yeah.
I mean, it matters what's on the map in terms of the gradients, but the specifics of what we designate low density residential is really within our purview.
And I think the structure of our zoning map is good. It's got the density in the villages, then we've got the village between the two village centers, which transitions to the low density residential, which then transitions to the rural ag and the residential. So I think the structure is good. I'm not sure those boundaries need to change. And like what Susan is saying, we can figure out what zoning we want for those districts and still achieve the overall framework that's already established.
So we'll just keep poking at that as it comes up. Right?
I would just argue if 80% of growth has to happen in village centers, we need bigger village centers.
And I would say that
No, that's not, 80% needs to happen in your growth area. Which is,
Who said 80% needs to happen?
that's like that's state and also CCRPC.
That's it's
The
a requirement.
ECOS plan, it's a guidance. That's the goal. That's the state
Thank
goal, and it's the Chittenden County stated goal. So that's what they are encouraging us to do. And it's in the growth areas, which at the moment in our future land, in the Jericho's future land use map, I forget actually it was village center and commercial district. So it's a lot more than just the village centers. And the other statistic they gave was that they're really trying to drive 80% of the growth into 15% of the land. So it is absolutely a tension that the consumption of land is not considered beneficial.
Right, can I just ask just to really put a pin on it? This going back to the, who gets to make what decision? So it's the recommendation, it's the guidance, it's not the requirement. So if we chose to go against the recommendation, what is the repercussion of that?
I mean, they could not approve our zoning changes.
I've been told by CCRPC that our zoning is our zoning.
So while they are encouraging it, we could conceivably make a recommendation that we love their encouragement, and for the state or for the county overall, it makes total sense, but in our particular situation in Jericho, we actually think it doesn't make sense given our town plan, our goals and our layout, because we're not like other towns where we have just one central area, because we have these 3 different blobs and blah, blah, blah. I mean, we could do that. But we
We
have
do,
to
but-
make a,
Maybe, but also look at the map that's right there on the screen.
yeah, no, I'm just asking, I just wanna conceptually make sure that I'm clear about it because of the, as you said, it's a tension, and I'm just trying to find out the boundary, is it the consequences of pushing on the tension versus retreating from the tension?
Do you know for sure? I don't know for sure what the implications are if we do something and CCRPC doesn't. I don't know if they just like write us a nasty letter or if there's something else. So that's
I
something
think we find.
I want to follow up
Maybe
and
that's
bring that back at the next, yeah,
be great. Thank you.
just so we know.
I'm fine to proceed as we are, but I just think it's
Yeah.
unrealistic to think that zoning boundaries created 50 years ago would continue to be in the best interest as the town evolves. And so I just think that it should be in our minds, we should have an open mind about, like, I could imagine, for example, the village district extending further to the southeast there. So I just think it should be in the back of our mind that, you know, we can do a lot within what we have, but at the same time, at a certain point, it might make sense to think, hey, maybe this has made sense 40 years ago, and maybe it doesn't make sense now.
Particularly given the housing demand and need
Mhm.
being different, so. So I'd like it to just be an open question for more research about like, what is the consequence? And then, of course, we have to decide our appetite for tension.
And
push.
engaging with the public.
Right, like
Because
all the
think-
things.
I would think that
Right.
changing zoning district boundaries would require a different level of public engagement.
Yeah, I
Oh,
agree,
sure,
yeah.
yeah, I just,
Mhm.
as we walk forward, it's just good to know. It helps me to know, and I will stop being a pest. Maybe, not really. I'm lying. I will stop it.
Can you humor me, because I was here when that stuff happened? And one person that I know is still alive and still functioning is Bert Linden. He told me personally that those boundaries were based upon the ability to create a vector. It was not based on good planning. It was not based on the logic of the topography. It was not based on how a person who owns and developed lands or the people who migrated here from Europe would have developed land. It was the easiest way to draw the lines.
Mhm.
So being restricted by that.
Mhm.
So back on his slide, good feedback on tweaking the throughout town wording, and then clarifying the language in the third bullet under guidance and including making sure that the commercial district is included. Great. Next slide. Great. Okay, so now we are getting into the meat of our discussion tonight. So looking at the zoning use categories, we're going to be looking at the zoning use categories that will encourage more missing middle housing. And hopefully by the end of tonight, we will have some agreement on any changes to types of housing allowed in existing zoning districts, and then any concerns that we would want to look into as part of those changes. All right, so the information on this slide shows different housing types allowed in different zones in the current zoning. It shows whether they're either permitted or conditional. So permitted is sort of like a by right, depending on other factors, they could just be approved by the zoning administrator, or if there are other factors that might go to the DRB. Conditional use, it just requires DRB review. This table is set up with 5 housing types in the left column, which include single family, duplex, triplex, and fourplex, multi-unit with 5+, and then multi-unit with 10+. Our BMG work already looked at housing types in the village center, so those are the columns on the left side. All housing types are already allowed in the commercial and the village district. I think we also looked at that as part of our BMG work. So the primary focus of this discussion should be on what's allowed in the 3 districts on the left slide, which would be the low density residential, the rural ag, and forestry. Any questions on this?
I just have one residual question from the previous slides, Chris. I just know when we were looking at like what is missing middle, there were two different schematics of different styles of housing. One which was ours and one which was in one of the reports. Does it?
Oh, the definitions.
These, does it matter this? And then the one before it looked different. If you go back, the next slide, the one slide further back, see, do we care?
Well, I don't think so, because it's more about like the number of units that are,
Just-
right. These examples are more tailored to Vermont. They're developed by Vermont. This is by Opticos.
Got it, okay.
Yeah,
so-
which I have seen like 100 times in 100 documents. and,
Okay, so we
yeah.
don't need to worry about that as we're thinking about fourplex versus fiveplex versus whatever. We're not talking about the style, we're just talking about the number of units.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right. So the information on this slide,
Can we pause for 1 second and go back a slide? Can we just talk through the implications of conditional? Because it really isn't the same in terms of the ease of that kind of housing being built and even the implication or impact that it might have on getting financing for a certain kind of housing, for instance. And so I agree that I definitely think that we need to talk about and think about the places where certain types of housing aren't and make sure how we feel about those. But I don't want to take the conditional off the table as though that housing is just as easy to do. Because I don't think that that's practically true.
SJ, where are you talking about? Are you talking about throughout all this, all the areas, or just in the forest, rural and low density?
And village.
So you're talking
I don't know about.
All of it. Cause
Yeah, I mean, I think we spent a fair bit of time. I didn't remember saying that 5+ wasn't allowed in Jericho Center, but that aside, I think we did a fair amount of talking about the village centers, but the commercial district, the impact of having a single family home is conditional. I've definitely heard from some neighbors about, that impacting their financing and their mortgages. And then again, for the village district and the low density residential, looking at those Cs, I think is important because multi-unit housing is something that we want to be talking about.
so I say what I hear you saying is I was saying let's focus on LDR, RAR, and FOR, and you're saying can we go back and look at conditional in village and some of those other ones? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would suggest that there is a property in Jericho Center that could support a larger building.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking of the property on
The one that you went on your tour,
Plains Road.
no, the one by the firehouse.
Yeah, behind,
Yeah,
between Plains Road and the firehouse.
Tillotson.
I think you could put a decent sized building there and not adversely impact.
I mean, the Rivers property.
The Rivers. Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I would just suggest that we might consider something larger in Jericho Center.
So I think the point's been made. What I want to make sure is that everyone understands the difference between conditional and permitted. Because this, I think, can be folded into the discussion. Okay.
And SJ's question is, how hard is it to do a conditional use?
What are the additional conditions that are applied?
Right, and how much harder does it make it?
And how much more expensive?
Yeah, the only thing I know is that conditional just automatically goes to the development review board. But I don't know if there are other.
Well, and I
factors.
think when you were speaking to the different developers, I think you did hear feedback from them that they didn't want to go in front of a review board. They wanted to know what they could build by right that was permitted, that going in front of a review board meant at the very least uncertainty.
That's a complication that may not make any difference in the end, other than more time and money for no real purpose.
Yeah,
Well, if it means that a developer doesn't want to come and build a fourplex because it's in the low density residential, and so instead they put a large single family house up, that because that'll be easier and faster, and they know that they can get it done and out. I think that that's an implication that is counter to what we're working towards.
I want to think about this a little more before coming well, we can talk about it later also, but I also know like we're talking about projects in areas that have more sensitive natural resources. So a conditional review may be something that we do want because it would have more discussion about what's happening.
Yeah, I think you're hearing what I'm asking for, which is more information and the ability to have the discussion so that we're all on the same page about those Cs.
Yeah.
If I might sort of maybe summarize the point you're after, which I think is relevant, is once we go to conditional, does it allow an adjoining property owner basically veto rights over putting anything on that site? Because they look at it and say, this isn't going to fit the character, it's not appropriate for the neighborhood. There's some special unique feature that we want to preserve, so you can't possibly have multifamily, you only have one. Does it open up that door?
Well, I'm pretty confident that there's no type of review that gives up like an adjacent property owner veto authority. I mean, it would give them the opportunity to come and present their case to the DRB, for the DRB to factor it in.
Which can be a veto. In a de facto veto may not be authorized as one, but raise enough objections of the developer just says that I'm out of here.
Well, that's different than the DRB. The DRB is gonna adjudicate the case according to the regulations. And here's another tension. The more clear the regulations are, the more precise or the better decision they can make, and it doesn't take that long. And I think our DRB's track record of approval is something like 99%, regardless of objections that they might hear, because if the regulation is what they're hanging their hat on. So the tension is the more clear the regulation is, the easier the approvals are. The more clear it is, the more prescriptive it is, and the more regulatory and heavy-handed that the regulations seem. So that's kind of the balance that we're striking.
And the other way of looking at that high percentage of approvals by the DRB is that the regulations are written in a way that's flexible and the intent of what they're trying to get at is clear, and that the DRB has a track record of working with applicants to approve development that is consistent with what the intent of the regulations are and protecting what we're trying to protect.
That is a cup is half full argument if I ever heard one. You don't know what isn't even being applied or put forward.
Right, that's a different, right. And that's kind of what you were saying earlier, SJ, like they'll look at 3 to 4 and they'll say too hard, I'll just do a duplex or a single family.
So we're not discussing the specifics of this chart right now.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, we're discussing whether or not you should have conditions in some of those locations. But if that's not the appropriate time to be doing it.
No, I don't.
Well, what I'm hearing is that the conditional uses should also be factored in, whether it's permitted or conditional, needs to be factored into what we're considering in terms of housing types and uses at a very high level. Okay. All right. So here's what to know about current housing. This is based on information that's in the town plan. So Jericho is overwhelmingly dominated by single-family homes. That's not a surprise to anyone. More so than in Essex or Richmond, our housing numbers are more in line with Underhill, Westford, and Bolton. That's just a flat statement. I'm not going to go through all those numbers, but you can see those. Yeah. And I think these are what one might expect based on our zoning. So single family and duplexes are permitted on 93% of land in Jericho. The 1% difference between the single family and duplexes is taking out the commercial district because single family homes are not a permitted use in the commercial district. It's a conditional use. And then the 6% where it's prohibited, that's in the open space district. So the Leahy Center for Rural Partnership is creating a clearinghouse database of information like the information that's on the left. The information is not live yet. This is just an example. It just coincidentally, this is just an example they shared of the type of information that it's going to have. So this is zoning requirements for building homes in Vermont. Now, this is statewide as opposed to towns. So that's sort of a caveat here. But it does show like what's permitted, that's the blue, versus what requires a public review, like the DRB, that's the purple. And then what's prohibited is in red, and then the gray are just parts of the state that towns just don't have zoning. So that's what that information is. So
Question.
yeah.
To the part on the right, these numbers exclude the firing range, which occupies 23% of Jericho.
Correct.
So, but that's the open space district.
The 6% that's shown here is what is not, which is open space that's not Ethan Allen firing range. So that's like Mobs Farm,
Gotcha.
and other parks that are such like Mills River Park. Yeah. And I took out the firing range because I thought
Yeah.
it
Okay.
just skewed things. Yeah. So thinking back to the table that showed the permitted and conditional uses, and this data on where different types of housing is allowed. It's easier to build a single family home or duplex in Jericho than state average. I know it's not a perfect analogy. We're actually a little better than this state when it comes to triplexes and fourplexes because it's 9.5% as opposed to we're like at 13% as what's
Well, we're
permitted.
29% between permitted and conditional.
Oh, right. But when you look at permitted for 3-family homes and 4-family homes, there's a difference between
Permitted and
permitted
conditional.
and conditional.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, not a perfect analogy, but we had the information and I thought it was interesting to compare that. I wanted to include something in the discussion on cottage courts because this is a building type that has come up a lot at past planning commission discussions. It seems like an ideal housing type to promote missing middle housing. I think it's important to note that Jericho zoning doesn't prohibit cottage courts, but if this is a housing type we want to encourage, there may be things we can do to help encourage them. And we're going to talk about those because you had that article to read. So something to keep in mind about housing types in our more rural districts is that they have a configuration of footprint that could align or be different than, say, a single family home or duplex, which could have implications for how they impact our natural resources. So, for example, a standard suburban home typically ranges in width from 35 to 50 feet, and a larger custom home could be 50 to 70 feet wide. By comparison, a side-by-side triplex could range from 60 to 75 feet, and a fourplex could range from 80 to 100. So there's not that much difference, although it's a little different. So these width ranges are drawn from a combination of residential subdivision standards, common builder floor plans, and missing building housing designs. Jericho's NRO applies to areas that are dominated by the single family and duplex zoning now, but it's recognized for its clear standards that it sets for protecting sensitive areas and the flexibility that they allow for creating design and problem solving. I know Chittenden County regularly points people to our NRO overlay as a model for other towns to follow. All right. So that was a lot to go through. I want to be mindful of time. It's 8 o'clock. Are there any questions or comments that on what we just went through that we haven't already made? Because now we get to the part of the meeting that I really like, which is hearing from planning commission members on takeaways for some of the readings that we did before tonight's meeting. So 2 readings were sent out, one on cottage court ordinances and another on the purposes of Jericho zoning districts. So who wants to start us off and share insights on what could shape our recommendations on housing types to allow in specific zoning districts? Based on time, do we want to do this for 15, 20 minutes? Because I think you guys enjoy doing it too.
This is the book club part.
Yeah.
I know. And I'm wishing I had taken notes instead of just like reading.
I thought the purpose of the district's text was good. I thought it was clear and there was flexibility built in and some overlap, but a clear sense of a spectrum. So there wasn't anything in the purpose of the districts that jumped out at me like, oh, wow, that's really like off. I found them to be good guidelines and good kind of like Heidi's always bringing us back to like, what's the higher level? What's the higher level? So as we work on this over the next couple of months, I think going back to the purpose of the districts and having it constantly like, okay. In terms of cottage courts, I thought that there were a lot of very appealing characteristics that came through in the ordinances. And I thought the sizes were interesting, like 800 to 1,200 square feet, 2 and 3 bedroom units. I thought they seemed well suited for clusters in a bedroom community like Jericho, especially if we think about attracting smaller, younger families who would appreciate living in a neighborhood. It's kind of like an alternative to like the typical suburban style neighborhood. It has a lot of the benefits and amenities of a neighborhood without being as land consumptive and more of a community minded spirit. Like we can share a garden and we can share parking, and it's definitely a little bit different than like my yard, my fence, my and then lastly, like one of the things I've been thinking about, especially like you drive on the road and you're like, this road is a shared resource. And living in a community is like a social contract. And the social contract that you make when you live in Manhattan or when you live in a neighborhood, Tyler Place or Valley's Edge, is different than the social contract you make when you live out on Nashville Road. And meaning like in the neighborhood, the shared resource is like, hopefully, the bike path and the walking path to the school, and you can walk to the store. And when you're in a rural area, it's like your tree is my shade and your field is my morning inspiration. Like, I know this sounds really like woo-woo, and I don't mean to sound so woo-woo, but they're different. And people, we've heard a lot like, okay, we want people to be able to choose their setting. And I want that and I agree with that. But I think the settings are different and they're different for different reasons. And it's just more just being mindful of like living together in a community, in your little micro community, and then in the macro community of Jericho. And that's what makes me like, I guess, inspired to try to do a really good job, because we're really talking about people's ability to build wealth and quality of life and feeling of safety and feeling of refuge. And that feeling of refuge is different. And that it's not just like words on a page to me. SJ has her hand up.
I mean, I don't have anything to say that's beautiful and inspiring like that. I'm just gonna bring it back to the technical. Sorry, guys.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm not woo woo. I the one big takeaway from the cottage court reading was that jumped out at me, and I just wanted to say for everybody in the room who's maybe felt some anxiety or pressures about this, and this is, I'm speaking to myself in particular. One of the zoning packages that went through, they said it took 18 months for the ordinance to be crafted and be adopted. And so I was just like, oh, that timeline is kind of on par with what we've been doing. So just a moment of whatever. So I hadn't, for the cottage courts, I wonder, it was funny because I had the uses table open at the same time that I was reading the cottage court thing for whatever reason. And I was like, the cottage court might be a really interesting response to the places where 5+ or maybe even 4plexes aren't allowed or are conditional. So I was thinking about Jericho Center. I was thinking about low density residential, and even in village zones where 5 to 9 units is conditional. And so is like one of the things that became really clear to me is that there has to be some kind of density incentive or some incentive to make the cottage cluster a reasonable thing for a developer to choose. And so it needs to kind of, there needs to be that density incentive, but also again, like these places where 5+ seems too big, or maybe even 4plex seems questionable. A cottage court use may make sense there because the scale of the buildings themselves is so small. I wondered if actually our maximum lot coverage was preventing the ability for cottage courts to happen, particularly in some of these places like low density residential and village where maximum lot coverage is 40%. And so and again, like I don't know this well enough. So just picking from the examples in the reading, 55% maximum lot coverage seemed to be what was needed. And it was stated in another part of the article that is a prohibiting factor for cottage cluster. So I don't know what that means for our regs, but thinking about that, and even for a PUD in the low density residential, it's still 40% for lot coverage. Anyway, so I was kind of thinking about it in terms of the table of uses and how this actually may be the same kind of density as a 5plex or even a small apartment building, but on a scale that makes more sense in some of these other settings where that's not allowed. And then the other observation was just like, this seems like a much more realistic and personally appealing option for senior housing and for downsizing than an ADU here and an ADU there, or waiting for Wisdom House. Like this seems like something that actually could be appealing and feasible within a short amount of time, for some of the folks who are in our community saying that they want to downsize and open up their home to a larger family.
Okay, other comments? Takeaways?
Some comments about the definitions of the districts. And I kind of have a multi-level question. I don't want to get into too much of it if part of the scope of our work is not to change those definitions. And is changing the definition different than changing the boundaries? So if we could look, and the underlying reason for my question is, will the definitions as currently written limit the type of housing that we are envisioning? Like, for, I feel like I'm talking a lot on the commercial district, but if you read the definition of the commercial district, it almost sounds a little bit like a zoning summary. Like, rather than like, as in comparison to some of the other district definitions. And then when I was reading the definition of the forestry district, it's not at all, it doesn't really talk about preservation of habitat blocks or ecosystem health. It's sort of like that rural character trope as leads the definition, and aesthetic and recreational, and not about some of the more valuable things that we've been talking about and what is represented in the town plan. So it feels like some of the language that's used in the definition is sort of off from our current thinking.
Pick up what you said, Sarah, about the cottage courts and where they fit in. Because one of the.
Who's Sarah?
Yeah, sorry, Susan.
I got really nervous that I was grounded just then, because that's the only
Well,
time.
at the last meeting, I called her Sarah Jane, so.
Yeah, that's all right, senior moment, I get to have those once in a while. What you mentioned though, Susan, was about the cottage court, and I think you were sort of dancing around the fact they're a very communitarian organization. If everyone in the cottage court gets along, it's wonderful and delightful, and that's what makes them attractive. But if the community falls apart for any reason, kind of the whole court suffers because of it. In the same way that if you're in a condo development and one of the condo owners decides that they're gonna do whatever it is they want to do, it ruins it for everybody else. And that, I think, requires that the development, the cottage court have maybe more stringent bylaws, more structure from a governance side of things, what most people consider when they think about cottage court. It's a great place if you have kids and you have a whole bunch of families with new kids there, guaranteed to have playmates and things like that. It's a great place if you're seniors and you want to have somebody to help you. But one bad apple, to use the phrase, causes a lot of problems with those. And I think people who have a communitarian bent want to go into the courts, and people who are more individualistic will find them not as nice. But they are something we in Jericho can really benefit from with the structure. But again, it's all about the structure and who goes into there more than what it is.
I thought it was interesting that the New York example were all rental units. A lot of them, like 100 and something.
Which makes it a lot easier to take the bad apple and evict them.
Well, and a lot of the article went on to say, or I kept reading about it more in depth, was in that particular case, there's a lot of graduates, and so there's just a lot of turnover, natural turnover.
Yep.
To the population.
So again, that's your starting your family. You need a social group to make it work. Or your family's grown up and now you want to have another social group that comes in. It's that middle group where the American nuclear family has evolved into, that is the one that probably may not like it as much. But do we have the resources to do it in Jericho? Probably. Something that makes sense for an income constrained family? Absolutely.
I feel like so many of the projects listed were kind of spearheaded by people with a vision.
Mhm.
Right, and somebody who really wanted to see it happen and carry it through and be persistent in getting it done. And that's sort of
And
hard to.
bringing
forget.
in like-minded people to come and live there.
I guess the question is that ours to think about and decide, or?
Right, that seems like that would be micromanaged, you know.
Yeah, that's, I mean, so I'm just thinking, I mean, I feel like we're, yes, all interesting, but not our job. No offense.
Well, we could certainly make sure that the zoning regulations would allow that tighter density.
Oh, that's
Centered
what I'm
on
saying, yeah,
people.
but who's gonna choose to live in it or not live in it, for what reason, and who's gonna manage the policies of it and all of that? That is not our job. Our job is whether or not the zoning allows it or does not allow it, period.
And if our goal is to provide more options that are more diverse, and it's a definite option that is not currently here.
Right,
It seems like we're motivated to try to figure out how to make sure our zoning would allow it and encourage it as an option.
Yeah.
It's an option that we don't have.
no,
It
it
is-
is, we're just,
Yeah, Chris's comment was, it's not prohibited by it was on one of the slides, it's not prohibited by our zoning, but it's not encouraged either. And there's probably things we could do to make it like quick, easy, simple.
Yeah.
And give people the vision, like, oh, I never thought of doing that on this piece of property before, that's
And to
cool,
allow a greater density
right?
that would allow for it.
yeah. I could ask for help as we move forward in the conversations. When this reminded me of, and SJ, it was your comments in particular about the difference between what the zoning can do and what policy can do. Right, which, so this idea of giving a bonus density, is that a zoning thing or is that a policy thing?
That'd be zoning,
That is still considered a.
because it's a regulation. Yeah,
So just like, as we move forward with these things, if someone, because I'm not really clear about what's what, and so please let me know if there are things that I'm offering up that are sort of out of the bounds. Or could be more creative in the bounds, I'm not gonna know that,
Mhm.
so thank you. And I loved your idea, SJ, so thank you, I have nothing
Mhm.
further to offer on that.
Can I just tack onto your thought about, visions, right? I think it would be great if we, the town of Jericho, could start holding workshops for people to sort of buy into this vision, like, what is possible? What does this new zoning enable? What can you do now that you couldn't do before? And just start holding a series of, one could be on ADUs, one could be on dividing, now that you could divide your property.
Yeah.
And, sell off half of your lot, and like, what can you do and how can you do it? And what is it gonna look like? And just start to pass on this vision that we've all seen to the general population in Jericho, so that we
Mhm.
can build a fire.
I love that.
Mhm.
So Sadina, are you thinking that we do that, before we do revisions, so that it's sort of a buy-in for?
Well, I mean,
Amendment
we
bylaw
just did the ones for the villages, right? So we could start there and keep, it doesn't have to have an end date. It can be ongoing as we make changes, right?
I think what you're saying is unrelated to the work we're doing now. It's just something else we could be doing to promote changes that we are making now and in the future. Is that
Right.
right? Okay,
Or mostly changes we've already made,
yes,
right?
Yeah,
Every time we make new changes, be like, hey, now there's new opportunities, or now there's new ideas that you might be able to pursue with your property.
Right,
It's just keeping the public up to date with
Right.
what we're
Absolutely.
doing.
Cause otherwise we can be like
Right.
changing all the regulations so we're blue in the face and nobody knows about it.
Duplex rule, what, 5 years ago now? And how many duplexes have been built? Now, there's a lot of factors in that, but I'm just saying, maybe if we had brought out the duplex wagon
Right,
earlier, maybe people would have been like, oh, cool, I'm gonna do that.
mm-hmm,
Or maybe most people wouldn't have, but
mm-hmm.
So, we're getting up on our saying. Chris, do you have anything you wanted to add on?
Not in addition to what's been said.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
It's just back to Sabina though. Sabina, we're coming up on the town reimagined, town plan, the town meeting reimagined, and we're always talking about what are we gonna do for our table at town meeting. I think your idea is what we should do for our table at town meeting. Look at the changes, here's what it looks like. We've made these changes, here's what you do now. Love it.
Mm-hmm,
And we have time, we have a little bit of time to actually do something.
mm-hmm.
I wanted to circle back to, well, two comments. So Susan spoke glowingly of the district descriptions. Wendy, I think you made a really good point about the forest description and whether, like, is it really doing what we want it to be doing? I didn't hear any,
Commercial,
in the commercial.
yeah.
I didn't hear any dissents from those comments, so I'm feeling like, other than the forestry and commercial, like we're good with the other ones. They all say something about housing, so it's not like they're precluding housing, but they do give some guidance for intensity of use.
That's
Well,
how
I do
feel.
want to underscore the question that Wendy asked, though, because I think it's really smart, which is, do any of those descriptions, forest is the most extreme, but I mean, when you read the commercial, like housing, it's
Yeah.
mentioned maybe once.
Yeah.
Do any of those descriptions limit what we can do in some of those districts? Does the town plan and those descriptions tie our hands in any way? I
I
think
think,
that's an important question to.
yeah, I think the definition of I think the commercial district has is its own project in and of itself to take on at some point. I think from a housing standpoint, it has the right, I think it has the right uses, and it actually precludes single family homes, which I don't think is a bad thing.
so this stuff,
I'm sorry, it doesn't preclude it, it allows it as a conditional use.
I do have to say that, Sabina, I read it as a given because it was passed so recently. I thought, oh my gosh, we just did this. I'm not touching it. It was there as not as I look at it to critique and change, but I
Price for
looked at it
information.
as just background information. So I didn't even read it with the thought that it was open for conversation. I just want to say that. So I have no comment on whether they're good or bad. I was just like, oh, here's more background information.
Yeah. That's why I didn't answer Wendy's question. I kept looking at Chris and he was just reading his notes
Mhm.
because we hadn't really.
We hadn't talked
that-
about it.
But I would say I didn't expect to change them unless we found some like egregious problems with them. The commercial district purpose. I think almost all of us here, we actually did draft a new purpose statement when we were working for a period of time on commercial district zoning changes. And so we could probably resurface that and see if if that would help, maybe make that a little bit more palatable. So I guess I'm not opposed to changing them there, but it wasn't really the focus.
But they won't preclude.
I mean, when I read them, I didn't read them as precluding because they all sort of say, at least from a housing lens.
That's sort of what I also think, although we are looking at the forest block data for the NRO update, in which
Right.
prompts me to say, well, if the forestry description is off, it is directly related to what we're looking at.
Right.
the forestry and rural ag both call out PUDs.
Mhm.
And I'm sort of feeling like maybe that we still can use PUDs, but
Right,
maybe there's more maybe there's more we can add to that to make it more diverse.
Mhm.
so Wendy didn't say, Wendy actually. You said, I don't think the forestry description is in line with what we are thinking of it now. But then you didn't say what we are thinking of it now.
No, she did, she was
Oh, you
talking
did?
ecological.
More ecological stuff, great, yeah. So that is what, I want to go back and look at that in that lens.
Mhm.
I think that is worth looking at as part of this. All right. Thanks, that was interesting and I think helpful and kind of 25, we only went over 5.
Probably a lot less than last time we did this,
Uh-huh.
2 weeks ago.
Last time I didn't talk.
All right. Yeah. So the key questions for tonight are, which zoning districts might be good candidates for additional building types that are currently not permitted, and why would we want to allow them? How might specific building types like cottage courts or fourplexes support our housing goals while maintaining the intent of the zoning districts? And what design or other factors need to be considered if new housing types are allowed in districts where they currently are not? So I don't know if we just want to go through these one at a time, or if we want to have a more general discussion. I don't feel strongly one way or the other.
Are you expecting that we answer these questions tonight
Um,
in the next 4 minutes? Or,
ideally, there's a discussion that leads to some guidelines that I can share back at the next meeting as a conclusion. Or for confirmation.
well, I guess it brings me back to the chart with the permitted conditional and then each zoning district.
Do you want me to go back to that?
Well, I mean, it's sort of the same
Mhm.
question.
I do think maybe going back to
It's a
that
little
part would
easier to
be
see it
helpful.
there.
So because Chris before said he wasn't previously thinking about conditional versus permitted, he was just thinking about not permitted, so that to me says, look at the blanks on the chart. And then your second question was more like, do we need more rows of the chart? Like a row that's cottage court potentially,
Potentially,
yep, who knows,
yeah.
okay.
I would channel my inner Chuck Lacey and say, why isn't we permitting everything everywhere as long as it passes water and septic requirements? And if we need to preserve lot sizes, why are we saying, to paraphrase, that you can build a 50,000 square foot house in a forestry district, but you can't build a 50,000 square foot multifamily unit?
Well channeled.
We've all heard it a lot. But to me, that's,
I wasn't gonna go quite that far, but I was gonna say something similar, which is, I'm not convinced that we should treat a 3 or 4 unit building differently than a single family house. So it's similar, but not maybe quite as far as you went, but.
sometimes it's good to go to the extreme to see if there's a rationale why you have an outer limit on it,
Mhm.
upper limit.
I do have to say, I have heard us talk about the importance of the overall footprint. So the size. The difference of having multiple dwelling units versus a single family conceivably could be the number of cars.
But that's not, in theory, yes, but you could also have a single family house with 10 cars and
And so a
tractors.
family
and-
house with at least 3 or 4 cars at
So
one point
I'm
in
not,
time,
I-
right?
I'm not convinced that that's a valid argument for precluding their existence.
In a duplex with 2 teenagers of driver's age, is gonna have, and parents, that's 4 cars right there,
Mhm.
8 for duplex, and
And we really don't have any data to back that
No,
up, right? So if we, it feels like if either we have data to base that decision on, like, as a consideration, like a triplex has more cars than a single family home. We don't have the data to say that, so it feels like that a number of cars kind of argument should be off the table.
Yeah, I was being a little bit.
I know.
But even take your point, Wendy, even the number of people is not preordained based on whether it's a duplex, triplex, or a five.
I think that's the case when you're talking about like 3 to 4 units. If when you're talking about like 10 plus units, I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
So are we right now trying to make a decision, or are we just like? What
I
are we
mean,
doing?
If, well, we can go back to the questions. So I assumed that we would be looking at the three, the LDR, the rural ag and forestry. And I assumed, and I assumed that there would probably be agreement to going to 3 to 4 units, triplexes and fourplexes as a building type to allow in those areas.
So I wonder if the question that's most compelling, honestly, is the last one to me. That, because if we were to say, we all agree that you could have fourplex, maybe question is, do you also say fiveplex? But let's say we were gonna say fiveplex or fourplex. What design or other factors need to be considered? Like that, I think that is the most compelling conversation for us to have at this moment. Like if we're saying that it's, so we've said lot size, potentially, number of cars, potentially. What are the other factors that we would be looking to either put some parameters around or protect or enforce?
okay, but my question again is, why would we treat quad differently than a single family house? There are no restrictions on a single family
That's
house.
nice, that's,
None.
yeah. So your answer, Chris, is there aren't any other factors.
Well,
Well,
to
I'm,
your point, I think
That's
yes,
the
and
question.
because there is gonna be a condition on septic capacity based on bedrooms.
of course,
So a quad may have more than a single family bedroom, may not.
why not?
SJ?
I think
Right.
that this is a complicated discussion. Heidi, you're kind of picking at something that's been difficult for me to figure out because the way that the conversation is blocked off, we're not talking about standard dimensions and things like that tonight. We're just talking about uses. And so what you're getting at is more fine detail than where we are. And so we can't make we can't, some of our decision making is limited because it includes information that we're not talking about yet and vice versa. So I just want to name that and say, I think that the idea is to get the conversation started. And then as we move into those other areas, it may make us come back and revisit some of this, but Chris S, you can modify that if that's not what you were thinking. And I will just add, yes, I think 3, 4 everywhere. And I would, it will take much more fleshing out in another section that we're not yet talking about, but I would consider adding something like a cluster development as an option for the places where 5 to 9 units and 10 plus units aren't allowed. Again, because the idea of the cluster development is getting to Heidi's point. The examples that we saw in our reading, at least, had lots of limitations about scale that I think would address some of the concerns that might preclude a 5 to 9 unit building in, say, Jericho Center.
Thank you, SJ. That was really helpful. I always go big before I go detail, and I did the reverse this time.
So like what I'm hearing is like 3 to 4 is kind of like easy, low hanging fruit. I'm not hearing anyone saying, oh yeah, we really should be allowing 5+ and
Well,
5+.
To that point.
Yeah,
I would say that it makes me think that it's another argument for form-based code in village centers, because I think with a form-based code, I think it would be possible to do a 5 to 9 unit building in Jericho Center on that property mentioned and have it be really great. Have it totally fit in. But not with the current zoning that we have. But if you used a form-based code tool set, I think you might get there.
Also, because I agree with you, Chris, I think that that particular strip that's still in Village Center is so just full of possibility, and possibility for density for sure. Sorry, I'm just stuck on cottage clusters, and it's Chris S's fault because he made us read about it. The other thing that pulled out for me too is that I've never had clear understanding about is that the connected. So like a lot of the cottage cluster, or some of the cottage clusters they talked about using that as condos. And I don't know that we have any specific, like condos aren't specifically called out, whether units are in a row or not, whether that matters or not is something that we need to consider or not, but another layer.
When you say in a row, do you mean like attached versus detached?
Yes,
or side by
exactly.
side,
Like,
side by side versus stacked.
That's our
mhm.
template for
Mm.
condos, right?
Right, so that's attached.
Right.
There's also, what's that one, just off of 15 down here on the left, is it open on Water's Edge or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
we've got a
pretty
bunch
hard.
of examples around town.
Yeah.
Right, so
But like that would be a 5 unit that wouldn't be allowed in a village center or a low density residential, but it's not, it's not a behemoth
Which
apartment
one?
building.
which
These
one?
small side by side 5 units.
And
I
so,
don't know, pick your favorite.
We've got one right on Raceway, just past
I guess
just before the river.
maybe this is
Good
a
example of
question
that.
for you. When I read that the row that says 4 unit or 5 unit, I read that as like one structure, like attached. Maybe they have their own entrances, maybe they have a single entrance, but it's basically a single structure. And that's different than detached. Like Jim was talking earlier about shared walls and having some privacy, and clustered to me is like an individual, is like single family, but I have 5 of them or I have 10 of them. So I don't think of 5 or 10 really close together as 5 units multi in that chart.
Yeah, like the triplex floorplex doesn't say they're side by side row houses.
I agree. I think what I'm not doing well is trying to use it as an example of Heidi's point, which is 5+ may seem big. It may seem like a really big scale because if you're envisioning up. But if you're envisioning, the house, the condos that are at the end of Raceway, like that doesn't seem like a huge scale. And so some of these numbers, the 5 to 9 unit that maybe seems overwhelming, well, maybe it depends on the configuration of those 5 to 9 units. And different configurations are important for different, and it gets to what you're saying, Chris, which is like form-based codes stuff. And so where this like ping-ponging in my brain is taking me is one of the questions I think that's on the screen, which is like, does the table need more rows? If we're thinking about adding or increasing the number of uses allowed in rural ag, for example, or the uses there sufficient? Or can we add some more diversity or some more housing options for rural ag? If we do we need to add another row or another line in order to boost what's possible on rural ag?
I also think that the categories might be too crude. I think might be too crude to say 5 to 9 units, because I think that it would be more relevant to describe the scale and the massing and other things. You could have 5 800 square foot micro apartments and it'd be smaller than a lot of the single family houses. And it might
Exactly.
not be a block of ugly, it might be broken up into different scale and massing. And so I think that the categories themselves might be too crude
So
with our
where does-
current zoning
Does
tools.
building envelope fit into what? Is that kind of where is that get covered by what you're saying, or is that a totally separate?
It's more of all the things, the tools we used in the form-based code in Riverside to think about how to address this sense of scale, the sense of size, the massing, the material use.
So like a 10-unit building in the Riverside Village Center that's 4 stories, or like a traditional apartment building. That's fine, that's where we would think it's supposed to be. But in the rural ag, if you had a building with 10 units, that's probably not the building form that we would want, but there might be, but then it gets really down to like the size and scale of it.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that I don't think you can base it just on the number of units. I think it's more about, needs to be more nuanced.
It would be differentiated by the zoning district.
And for sure, the village centers, I think all could support a higher unit building if the massing was handled properly. And then in the more rural districts, it might be less about massing and more about, I don't know, land use and vehicles and other issues, but I guess I'm just saying that the categories I think are I can imagine a scenario in which you could do a building of that size and it could be great.
Yeah, I don't know if the categories in that left column, I think they may be okay, but how they are realized in the different districts matters.
It's the combination of the categories and the zoning tools that we have. I think if we
Right.
had, in the village centers, if we had different zoning tools, like the form-based code, then I think that you could work that with the number of units and make it be successful. Which is beyond the current discussion, I realize, but.
Sort of, I mean, we can look at, I think what you were saying is like, it's not so much that the rows themselves might be okay, even though they are crude and sort of a general category. If the standards for the different districts get at what the differentiation is, that should be
What the intent of the
true
district.
based on the land use and the impacts and how it's designed. Right,
Not the NRO, but like that structure,
right,
like when you
Right.
have these conditions, you should
do
try to do
do
this.
this, right. I mean, the number of units per acre it's not a crazy concept, or it's not like it's a useless concept that I mean, every single zoning I've ever seen, ever is based on units generally per acre, unless you have no minimum lot size and no density limits, which we have in the village center. Because like we talked about it last time, a household is an impact. And I think there is data about the average number of people in a household today. You know, the US Census can tell us that. And sure, this house has 8 bedrooms and this apartment has 2 bedrooms. And sure, you know, can't imagine every scenario, but we can definitely use averages. Like the average household owns 2 cars. The average household doesn't own 12 cars. So we have to like use common sense parameters.
In urban areas, though, the zoning is more about lot coverage and, massing and things like that than it is, because they have municipal services, and so
Right.
that's different than where we are.
I
Right,
think-
but we have that now in our village centers.
I think what I'm
in
hearing though
Riverside.
is that it's a common tool. And it's a crude tool. Like we can accept both, like it's common and it's crude, meaning it doesn't have a lot of nuance, which is what Chris is saying, right? So yes, it's common. Are there any enhancements that we might want to make in our current thinking about it? Knowing that our goal is to increase housing types and availability, right? And so maybe if we have those in mind as we think about each of the zoning areas or types, as we're calling it, come back and revisit that and sort of say, okay, so in this low density, right, we're encouraging 5 units, and the encouragement is to have a certain scale or size so that it is not, so that somehow we're encouraging the amount of land per unit yields more housing. I don't know what it is, but somehow we do that in each of the different zones, because those are our goals, right? But we start with the basic, which is the left-hand chart, right? Add a row if we think we need one, as Jay was sort of getting at, is like, do we need a different row that is not just 4-plex, 5-plex, but there maybe clustered design has its own row. Because it is so different, and we describe what the difference is, and it has more parameters, and if we think it's the right way to go, we love it for whatever reason, then it becomes permitted by right in multiple places. And that's part of the encouragement. I think there are ways that we can do that. So we're adding a little bit incrementally onto the structure that we have now. And we can go back when we talk next time to look at the question of how many acres per in each zoning, right? So, and then the question, Chris, I think that you, Chris Brown, really hit on all the time is when we look at lot size, number of units, recognizing that the number of units but a single family home can be as large as a 10-unit building. Just always have that in the back of our mind, and that what we're trying to do is encourage closer to the 10-unit than to the single family home where appropriate. I think those are our guidelines.
It would be easier if we were willing to regulate single family homes.
Yeah.
Well, I actually had that on my list. I had that on my list. I was like, all,
Just assign that sizes.
Right?
right.
Sorry, you're not allowed to build a house bigger than this?
Yeah,
Why not?
I mean,
Some towns have that, they have a maximum
It's
house.
not unheard of.
it would be a lot simpler. We've been afraid to touch single family
Really?
houses, but
People do that?
The biggest takeaway I'm hearing so far is that it's not the use so much as the density massing and design.
scale,
In the sense of, you mean, single family versus fourplex, same square footage.
Even beyond
Even beyond that,
fourplex.
but yes.
That's
same
what I'm
square
hearing.
Footage, whether it's a single family, multifamily, or whatever. If it's 50,000 square feet and we approve it for one, we should approve it for everybody. Provided septic is provided and so on and so forth.
Well,
That's way beyond what I was thinking.
yeah, I would say,
Why shouldn't we? Then?
And if you're using that 50,000 square foot as a real number, or as a, like, here's an example.
Here's an example, it's a straw man. Feel free to burn it if appropriate.
I would say that it's more about the density, massing and design and making sure that it's appropriate for the intent of that district.
Can you just tell me what massing means?
It's how big the thing is and the configuration.
Okay.
So a
Um,
house that has a flat roof and is 2 stories is going to have a different massing than a house that's 2-story but has a sloped roof. Just the scale of it just appears different. Like a barn with its sloped roof is going to be different than an apartment building that's the same size with
Gotcha.
straight.
Yeah. And I think that like
Well,
I
wait, I
do
want to make sure
think-
the architect agrees with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Huh?
Um,
I do think that like the density, the number of units, yes, but I mean, I think we've talked about, and again, it came up in our reading for tonight too, that like you can limit the size of each dwelling unit as well um, if you're worried about impact. Like I think that scale and impact are similar, but maybe, yeah. Yes, I'm done talking, sorry.
But that would then, if I'm not mistaken, require that Jericho institute for the first time ever a maximum size building.
we have a maximum size building in Jericho, it's 60,000 square
50,000
feet,
square feet.
right?
It's
but just
60,000.
with-
That-
so
But
it's
again,
not
if
the
you-
First time ever, there is a
Okay.
limit, and that would apply to any building, even if it were a single family house, so.
Okay,
You could also
I see that.
say, you could do a 4,000 square foot building anywhere in town. Put as many units as you can in it. Or 3,000, or whatever the number is.
I am a middle child, so I feel like I like
Mhm.
split the difference and try to find the compromise. So when I look at that chart, I go 3, 4, fine. Probably everywhere with a whole list of concerns which apply to any building and any house. I don't care if it's single family, I don't care if it's a fourplex. I can't feel comfortable with 5 and up in the forestry district. It's just, you're putting people, you're putting development, you're putting pressure, you're putting sprawl in an area that is not designed to accommodate development. And lots of units in my simple brain is more development. Lots of, and we want families, we don't I mean, sure, we want everybody, but it just doesn't seem smart it's not smart growth, it's not what we're.
But you're assuming, that argument assumes that there will be little to no development in the rural ag of any kind going forward. Because if you had a piece of land that was big enough to support 3 separate houses spread out,
Yeah,
but you also could take that piece of land and do a condensed building with 5 units in it, that would be better environmentally than the 3 spread out. So I guess my question is, it seems like you're wanting to just not have much of any development in the rural ag, which is fine, but is that realistic?
Can I slightly redirect? And I'm not the person who knows the answers to it, but what percentage of our forestry and rural ag has soils that are suitable for septic?
well, we looked at a little bit of that when we worked on the future land use map. And that's what helped us place those tan blobs. So where the tan blobs were in the rural ag, not in the forestry, because the forestry is pretty cut and dry, like there's not much there that's developable. It's like steep slopes, and where the tan blobs were better locations based on a bunch of criteria. And one of the criteria was proximity to existing development and proximity to paved roads.
Why not dirt roads?
I mean, you should go to a select board meeting and
Mhm.
talk for 11 hours
Hmm.
about dirt roads. It's a friggin'
I
waste.
live on a dirt.
Right, it's so, because the more people you put out on a dirt road, the more pressure you put on the road, the more pressure you put to then deliver some bicycle pedestrian
Yep.
facilities, the more pressure you put on erosion and stormwater. It's not free. It might be cheaper for the developer, so sure, we get 5 units of housing, but it's not cheaper. Maybe it is cheaper, I think your question is a good one. 3 all spread out, 5 together is obviously.
Cottage court.
Well,
Right,
and
that's-
especially if there's a limit on the size of the 5 units.
But we're telling ourselves that, and that's what I keep trying to say, is that we haven't heard from any actual experts on this to tell us that what we're presuming to be true is true.
Well, it's except that if you have 10
It's
acres and
just
your house is in one
number.
corner,
Yeah, I get
then
it,
you get 9 acres of for the
I agree
animals.
with you, but if you're loading that space with so many more units of housing, yes, it's saving some of that land, leaving it as open and hopefully intact in terms of ecological function, but we can't say for sure that we're not harming the ecological function, or
It's true, we don't have the data, but to me, it seems analogous to the state's desire to concentrate development in specific places. You're concentrating development.
I get it. On surface value, I agree. It sounds great on paper. You could see there's more land here, there's more houses here. It's just, but I'm still like, where's the evidence that tells us that that's okay? Or are we just telling ourselves it's okay? Because we all want improvements and more housing.
This has been a really far-ranging discussion. I think this has been really good. I think we actually have a lot to work with in figuring out.
Too much, maybe.
No, I think it's good. And I mean, these questions are like good prompts. But I think we've got a lot to work with, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I come up with in terms of what we agreed on for our goals and guidelines, so we can follow up on that at our next meeting. But I don't want you to feel like we didn't get anything done, because conversation was all over the place, because I think we covered a lot of ground. You're looking at me like you're a little dubious.
No, I'm thinking you're doing a great job in recognizing that we've done what we can tonight. And I'm thinking about ways of making sense. And that there's not gonna be any more sense making tonight, so.
Like, what can we
Right?
make sense of? Because I mean, as Shay's right, there are other factors
Right,
that we need to take in, but I am constraining you to focus on some things and not other things, so that we can get through this.
and I think
Yeah.
it will be really helpful, and I'm imagining, like a matrix or
Yeah.
a chart or something that sort of, I think there's a core piece of agreement in lots of things, and then there's a few bubbles that
Yeah.
are still floating that we haven't landed, but there is a core piece that I find.
So I do want to get into other things, so we don't have much time, and there's at least one other thing I definitely want to get to tonight, so
Let's
I'm gonna
transition.
move on.
Let's go.
Okay. Hey, Jim, want to say anything?
The devil is in the detail and planning, and I think you would benefit. I've brought this for Chris, I hope to get it back, as an autopsy of how we really screwed something up in Jericho. The common land in a 3-lot subdivision ended up separately mortgaged and retained by the developer. And when all of the lawyers did their work and all of the other people did their work, that the common land, which I've been doing this for a really long time, should have been subject to the control of the homeowners association and should not have been hypothecated by anybody other than the homeowners association. And so this makes Jericho look like a jerk. So somehow a pretty major thing with three very expensive homes are in the middle of what's going to be. I can just see, this is what we think of as lawyers' retirement.
Where is
Where's
that?
Norton Lane?
It's off of,
It's in my neighborhood. It's off the foothills
Oh,
and it's,
where they,
Development
this,
you
where
can
they,
see from Raceway. Couple big houses.
yes,
yeah, you go up
this
Raceway.
is an
Then you
awful
take-
situation.
And
Yeah.
it's only about, what's like $4,000, $5,000 in back taxes.
7 or 8
Yeah.
plus fees and penalties.
It's,
And
it's,
it truly, I mean, it's like, how did this happen?
okay, so we'll have to answer that
Thank you.
mystery. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing it to our attention.
you.
Go, Chris.
Okay. You all know, but the select board approved our zoning amendments, and I have a BMG cake for us tonight to celebrate. So we'll do that.
The cake?
Well, you haven't had my cake yet, so let's not have any conclusions on that. The other thing is, I think you all are familiar with the Homes for All initiative. That's where the toolkit comes from. And at a previous meeting, I'd let you know that the state was putting out an RFP. They were going to come up with 10 designs. Okay, well, now they are looking for 3 municipalities to partner with as a pilot project. So there's a questionnaire that is due this Friday, which I'm planning on submitting. I'm letting the select board know about that on Thursday. I'm assuming they won't have a problem with it because we're submitting it. And if we do get selected, then we can decide whether we want to do it. I think there are some questions about whether we have the capacity to do it. So anyway, that's just something that's coming up. And then the wastewater task force has had 3 meetings. It's established 3 subcommittees. So there's outreach, finance, and technical committee. 3 of the task force members are right here. So we're all working away at our task force meetings and subcommittee meetings. So I think we'll just have more to report as we work through those things. So unless you guys want to have anything you want to add to that.
There was one, I had a long meeting today with the woman from the LCT with Kate. There was one question that came up on that relative to the wastewater, which is, and it's a zoning legality question, I guess, but the question is, will there be a point at which Jericho says to an existing or a future building owner there, you are required to connect to the system? And if that's the case, is it something that could be zoned in a zoning regulation that says new development must be connected to the municipal wastewater system?
and water system.
So, yeah, I remembered that when they did the feasibility study as like, that's a policy decision that the town is gonna have to make, and that different towns have approached it different ways.
It
Some of
is.
them said like, oh, you can do it you have to do it in 10 years, and some of them said you can do whatever you want, and others said you have to connect.
The reason I'm bringing it up is because so much of that, I think it's different for an existing building than an unbuilt piece of land.
Okay.
And that if it's something that could be zoned, could we get out ahead of the unbuilt pieces there now? Because it will be it relates back to, the user fees that are going to be generated and the cost to maintain the system and pay back. And
So like, could we make the zoning say now, like, if there is,
new development must connect to a municipal wastewater system?
if there's a municipal wastewater system
Correct.
available, yeah.
Correct.
I think that's something the task force needs to take up and
Yeah.
figure out and
Yeah.
recommend if and how we do. I would imagine we would want to do that.
Well, yeah, the first question is it, can zoning legally require that? And the second question is, if it can, then should we do it? And we probably should, but anyway, we just might want to be out in front of that.
Okay, that's a good one, yeah. Anybody else have any other updates?
The Energy Task Force is having a meeting in October to talk about, using, renewable energy in homes, and the focus of the talk will be to show that it does not necessarily increase the price of a home. So they're trying to show that both can happen simultaneously. So I don't know the exact date, but it's in October, and it should be good. It's a local speaker who's got experience with building net zero homes.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Anything else?
It's
Anybody else?
just got her hand up.
SJ, thank you.
I've got two things. One is, the housing report is, just about finished. I think we're gonna call a emergency meeting to get a quorum together to just approve the report, maybe next week. So that'll be out. And then the other thing is, everyone please come to the town meeting kickoff on Saturday from 10 to 12 at MMU. If you can't come in person, you can log in online and participate remotely. But we'd love to see you there.
Okay, thank you. Good to go? Any other business? I had other business, but I can't remember it now. Okay, our next meeting is October 7th, and we will be working on dimensional standards, lot sizes, and density. So kind of a continuation of our discussion tonight. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, I made a motion to adjourn. Chris seconded. All those in favor of adjourn say yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.